Hello and welcome to Politically Unstable. I'm the Washington Times commentary editor, Kelly Sadler, and today I am joined by Nicki Neily. She is the founder and president of Defending Education. Nicki, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So there was a few stories that broke this week regarding our education system. The first one was out of Pennsylvania. They're touting a new literacy program for their students on telling students and teachers how to spot misinformation, disinformation. That's kind of a key word for the left. They love that. And funneling them into what they say are unbiased news sources so that they can get a better education and understand what the true news is. Worldwide, those outlets are The Guardian, Al Jazeera, the BBC and Reuters, which all have a left-leaning bias. And then when it comes to national news, it's AP, it's PBS and NPR, which Republicans just worked really hard to defund, to decouple taxpayer money to. Their propagandists, The Hill. And then for their left-leaning choice, it's Fox. And for the right-leaning choice, it's The Dispatch. The Dispatch is famously anti-Trump. It's from a bunch of disaffected Republicans that are writing for that paper, never Trumpers. So you wouldn't really classify it as a conservative news source. But what do you make of these efforts? Is Pennsylvania the only state in the nation that's trying to push this? Or does it have the potential to kind of spread nationwide?
No, you're totally right. This is frightening, and it is everywhere. And it's funny because even thinking back to the Biden years, this is something that was being pushed by their team, as you said, disinformation being a very hot topic on the left. And it had the sign off and the endorsement of people like Randy Weingarten. And frankly, anytime the teachers union say this is a great program, I think, handle with care. Because as you said, it's teaching children to which sources to go to, filtering out what is or is not true. And we saw that play out, obviously, extremely successfully during COVID when they were able to control and throttle what people had information to. And so treating children with kid gloves, I think, is an insult. We want children to be able to read and discern and develop their own opinions. But also, I mean, so many of those outlets have fallen, they were asleep at the switch during COVID, during the Biden administration. Even thinking about the Associated Press now has partnerships with a lot of left-leaning foundations that then channel information through or outlets like ProPublica that then get sort of whitewashed and are republished in outlets like the AP. But again, coming from a very clearly ideological standpoint, where this is making our children worse off. It's not making our children better consumers of news. It's making them a little bit stupider.
Well, I just don't understand. I'm all for promoting literacy. I'm all for getting younger children to read newspapers like the Washington Times and long form articles, because I feel a lot of kids these days are getting their information off of a 20-second TikTok video, which might not necessarily be accurate in the information either. But why not just promote a wide spectrum of news? Give them the New York Times, give them the Washington Times, give them the Washington Post, give them the New York Post, and then, an exercise on, okay, these stories were all covered by these four outlets. Do you notice the difference in them, the perspective in them, and analyze so that they can make up their own judgment or understand where the spin is coming from? This just seems to be putting their spin down their throats and then labeling it as the truth. These are unbiased networks when really they're not.
Absolutely. No, you hit the nail on the head. We want our children to learn how to think critically. And I mean, I'm probably stricter than many parents, but I certainly do not want my child consuming Al Jazeera, right? Like that is Qatari funded Hamas propaganda. So there are some outlets that I don't even want them to look at, or if they do, I want them to realize, as you said, what is the lens that this is coming from? What is the agenda of the people who are putting this information out?
And is this a nationwide effort being kind of pushed by the unions? It happened in Pennsylvania and was picked up in Pennsylvania this week. But should people in other states be concerned that this, and they call it the Information and Media Literacy Toolkit, which is given to teachers to then disseminate to their students. Is this a nationwide effort?
It is, absolutely. Yeah, and it does, on its face, it sounds really great. Of course, we want media literacy. So we're seeing states like California, Wisconsin, where these bills, these ideas are being floated at the state level, at the local level. But let's also remember at the end of the day, where our children are at in terms of academic achievement. Our children cannot read, they cannot perform basic math or science functions. And so to add on additional mandates, additional sort of like course requirements that are like sort of watering down everything else, what is being thrown out when they are just getting this kind of propaganda? I think it really is concerning because we're also putting, it's not technically an unfunded mandate, but it is putting another level of responsibility on teachers, tying their hands, saying you must use this. And so I think it's a really questionable thing, both pedagogically as well as content-wise.
In other news this week, your organization is pushing governors in all 50 states to do a DEI audit of their public school systems. Can you tell us what this includes, why you're pushing it, and if you've seen any results thus far?
Sure. So yeah, this really kind of started because we saw what happened in Iowa a few weeks ago with the Des Moines superintendent, who was hired through the state's affirmative action hiring plan in public schools. And it's so funny because just over the past couple of years, as we've been working at Defending Education, we talk to so many parents and policymakers who say, I'm in a red state, we don't have these problems. And that's one of the reasons that when we get tips, when we have investigations, we put everything on a map on our website because we want to show just because you're in a red state, just because maybe you send your child to a private school, doesn't mean that these problems aren't taking place. And in Iowa, again, it's a Republican governor, there's a Republican attorney general, Republican legislature, but they have had this law on the books for years, which is really surprising to me. I am a university appointee in Virginia. Governor Youngkin appointed me to the board of University of Mary Washington. And after Trump was elected, we had a board meeting where we were discussing how to comply with the executive orders. And one thing that my university president flagged for me is that there were just a lot of bad state laws in the books that tie his hands. There are DEI reporting requirements. There are minority and women-owned business contract requirements. And that to me was just really fascinating. And so, particularly as we look for the federal government, as they're trying to devolve power back to the states, I think it's sort of a simple asking state legislatures, clean up your own house. Like, let's get this ready. Let's really make sure that we are complying with federal anti-discrimination law. This should not be a complicated thing. Frankly, you should have been doing it the whole time. But are there programs, are there policies, be it on hiring, be it on admissions for universities, be it for promotion? There are a lot of questionable union contracts we have seen that that prioritize racial quotas, things like that. But these are things that are not only immoral, but also unconstitutional. And so we think it's a very reasonable ask, but we'll see how people start to respond. We have gotten acknowledgement letters, but we have not yet gotten any commitments from any policymakers that they're going to actually conduct such an audit.
And what prompted this, and just for our viewers, is Ian Roberts out. He was the superintendent of schools in Iowa, of Des Moines Public Schools, the largest public school system in the state. And he was an illegal alien. Not only that, he was an illegal alien with a criminal record, and he fled ICE arrest. He eventually was detained, and the school had no idea about the fact that he owned firearms illegally. They had no idea over his past records. I think he lied on his resume in some areas, and the school board is blaming it on basically the recruiting team that they hired. But they did have elements that they needed more diversity within their hiring system, and he was a perfect DEI choice on paper, but they just didn't do the proper vetting with him.
Right. And our students deserve better. They deserve the due diligence. But even watching over the years, prior to the Biden administration, a lot of these states putting in place laws that channel funding on the basis of race, programs on the basis of sex, right? And we're watching the different high school athletic associations and states wrestle with the issue of male and female sports and female spaces like locker rooms. We have filed a number of civil rights complaints against school districts across the country, including Chicago and Los Angeles, because they have Black student achievement plans that provide for extra tutoring and assistance for Black students only, when school districts' own statistics show that students of all races and ethnicities are struggling because, well, frankly, teachers aren't doing their job, and we're doing everything but teaching children reading, writing, and arithmetic. In Illinois, Chicago Public Schools' defense of their Black Student Achievement Plan was that this is a state law. Well, that state law is unconstitutional. And so again, we think this is just very reasonable. Look, see what's on the books in your state and clean up your own house.
I think it's very reasonable too, and I encourage all of our viewers to go to their state lawmakers and ask if this is something that they're going to do and plan to do, because protecting our children and their learning environment should be number one, and there should just be a sole focus of these schools just to be teaching, reading, science, mathematics, the core competencies that will allow them to gain success later in life, and not focusing on the DEI stuff, not trying to make everything equitable, having actual standardized tests and meeting those requirements and being held accountable. But moving on, you brought up Chicago public school systems. This was another story this week that the school board there, and Brandon Johnson, as the mayor of Chicago, is very close. He came from the school board, basically, the Chicago public school system. They are now petitioning the governor. Brandon Johnson is on board. They want to move to remote learning for students who feel that their immigration status might be in question. They are concerned about raids in the schools and the children's fears. And so they're pushing for the governor, Pritzker, to declare a statewide emergency so that they can close down the schools essentially and return to remote learning. Kind of, what do you make of this ask? This seems like a step backward to me. And the governor, Pritzker, to his credit, has said that this is declaring a statewide emergency is something that he's not ready to do right now.
Once in a while, I'm pleased when Governor Pritzker does something that's not stupid, but we'll see. We'll reserve judgment on that one. It is disappointing. It is horrifying, but also so unsurprising coming from the Chicago Teachers Union. I mean, let's think back. During COVID, this is the organization that tweeted, "The push to reopen schools is rooted in racism, sexism, and misogyny," right? Nothing about student achievement. As we saw, school closures hurt children, period. Who did it hurt more than anybody else? Disadvantaged children. Families like yours and mine, we work from home, we can help our students, we can find them tutors. Poor students do not. And so those are the students whose achievement, whose scores fell off a cliff. And frankly, even before COVID, they were not in great shape academically to start with. And so, I think even back to when schools were closed, there were teachers unions advocates from across the country who said, well, the good thing about school closures is that all kids are being, they're all losing at the same rate. How dare you? And so just to think that we're going to start that, reopen that wound again, when children have not even made up the learning loss that they have had from 2020 and 2021, it's sick and perverse to me. And this is just, again, another handout to the teachers unions. Brandon Johnson, who was a CTU member, jumping through hoops to try and, pay off the constituency that got him elected. They got out the vote when he was during his election, to the detriment of Chicago school children. But the teachers unions don't want to be in school. They don't want to have to do their jobs. They don't want to have to do their responsibility. There are good teachers who are stuck in the system, and my heart goes out to them because so many teachers have gotten into this profession because they care about children. And, one of the things that happened during school closures is children who were not being fed, children who were being abused at home. Now, there were not teachers, there were not those mandatory reporters that were around to be those guardrails and that source of stability for so many of these children in inner city schools who really desperately needed that structure. And so for this to be something that CPS is proposing, because a handful of children who are here illegally are fearful, is really, in my mind, throwing out the baby with the bathwater. And this is something that all of us, if any other school district in America, because I can certainly see Los Angeles or Seattle or some of these other districts start to propose things, I think we have to, stand up, raise our hands and say, how dare you over my dead body?
And, the other thing after COVID is the truancy rates in these public school systems has skyrocketed. A lot of these kids that were moved to remote learning never actually returned back to school once, the schools reopened. And it's something that these inner city schools are still battling with, just getting the students back into the classroom. So trying to shut them down again is absolutely ludicrous. Nicki, before we go, I also want to talk about New York City. I know that your organization has been doing a lot of work to protect the gifted and talented programs there. We know that it's election season. Zohran Mamdani looks like he is going to win the New York City mayoral race. He has pledged to eliminate all gifted and talented programs within the city. I'm not sure why. It probably has something to do with equity, making the other kids not feel as good because they didn't qualify or get into the program. Can you speak to that effort, to what you're doing there?
Sure. Yeah, we just settled a lawsuit that we were involved in New York City that had been going on for 4.5 years. In 2021, a group of activists sued the New York City public school system, alleging that the city's specialized school program, which is the crown jewel of American public education. I mean, it has produced, I think, 14 Nobel laureates. There are the gifted and talented programs. There are the art schools. It is truly like a really fine program, but it's one where students have to test into. It is purely based on meritocracy. And so these activists alleged that the wrong mix of students were in it, that there were too many Asians, there were not enough of the other races. And so their proposed remedy for this situation was that race should be injected into every element of the program, into hiring, into curriculum, into funding, into admissions. I mean, everything. It's such a clear violation of the Equal Protection Clause, absolutely perverse. And so this to us smelled a lot like a sue and settle, which is a legal tactic that we see the left do quite frequently when they can't achieve their policy ends through the proper legislative procedure. They will just try and achieve the same outcome through court. So we intervened successfully. So we, at the time, were defending the city's specialized school program alongside then Governor Cuomo and then Mayor de Blasio. And we were right. You know, we were worried that the city and the state would not vigorously defend the program, which they really didn't, nor would they make the equal protection argument, because frankly, so many government officials want to discriminate on the basis of race in other settings. And so we came in alongside because we felt that the voices of students and families in the program, or who wanted to be in the program, were important to take into account. So eventually, finally, last week, the New York City or the New York State court system, which is all backwardly named, you start at the Supreme Court and work your way up to the Court of Appeals, said that no, this is not the proper role of the judiciary, done and done. But as you said, this is something that possible Mayor Mamdani has said that he wants to do in the name of equity. And so it's something that we're keeping an eye on very, very closely because if they ever allege that they are trying to change this program because of race, again, that will trigger these equal protection concerns that we have. I think what's interesting to note about the New York City specialized school program when it comes to race, though, is that the percentage of Asian students who are in the program that are at or below the poverty line is actually higher than the percentage of Hispanic students who are at or below the poverty line. And so this really, at a certain point, comes down to individual choices and priorities that families and parents make about how to spend the limited resources that they have, the time that they have with their children. And so if education is a family value for you and for your community, then you act accordingly. And so certainly there is much that has to be done in New York City as well as across the country to raise up the lowest performing students and the ones who are most in need of support. But that kind of support should be done on the basis of need, period. It should not be done on the basis of skin color. America is better than that.
Nicki Neily, thank you so much for joining me today. And Carrie, soldier on. You're doing God's work.